The episode you are about to hear was originally recorded at an MSTU, epic marathon stream at Theory Underground. Theory Underground is a lecture course, ongoing research, seminar, and book publishing school buy-in for workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing organizations, institutions, and movements. We are all about trying to understand the situation anew. This requires what Marx called the ruthless critique of everything in existence, including the left, Marxism, politics more generally, church, capital, modern schooling. It's all up for question. Whether you are an atheist or devoutly religious, whether you are in a political movement or party, or are independent, whether right or left or neither left nor right, you're welcome here. If you want to get more involved, there's two main ways to do that. To support the public and free content, you can become a patron over at our Patreon. But if you want to get involved, if you want to have special access to some of the course content that is only for members, or if you are interested in being a part of the discussions or being up for the turn, having us actually read your work, then you'll want to become a subscriber. Go to theoryunderground.com and get involved. Thank you. All right. Welcome back to Theory Underground. How you doing, Elton?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. Happy to say hi to Nance.
Good to see you, man.
Yes, sir.
I'm retarded, and I always try to like text Holly and text you, but I never do because I'm always busy, and then when I'm busy, I'm thinking about it, but then when I'm like not busy, I'm like laying in a bubble bath, not doing anything. So
Right.
I've meant to call you guys a lot and haven't done so. So
I can relate with that a lot, but it's good. Good to see you. And I imagine I'll be seeing you here in a week and a half.
Yeah. Very soon. Yeah.
Literally a week.
Yeah.
Okay. Literally a week. Yep. That's awesome.
Yeah, TUCon is next week. We're very excited. So for the majority of you in the audience who don't know about Elton, let me go ahead and give you a quick rundown. Elton L.K has a podcast called The Working Class Intelligentsia, and he was also running the DSA podcast called Class for quite a while. He's also was on the National Committee, National Education Committee of the DSA. He and I were for a very hot second in the same DSA because I helped start the Boise DSA. I catalyzed it. I didn't organize it, but I catalyzed it. And then I ran away because I was like, I don't like this. And Elton stuck with it because he's a principled man, much more principled than I am. And since that time, the two of us have thought a lot about class, which is the title of the segment. And so, we've been getting together. We've been thinking about this concept for a while now. It's why we did the professional managerial class consciousness and ideology class together, which Nance was present for. In fact, Nance, we didn't even know you back then, right?
Yeah, I was just some weird dude from the internet, and that course was fire, dude. I went into that course like, yeah, PMC, I don't really care. And I came out of that course really understanding how it fit into like whatever structural kind of critique I was working up. Like it was like, oh, this is the linchpin. Like this is kind of the missing ingredient that I had neglected to even tarry with, because I had just heard I was like, oh, that's like some dirtbag left people phrase, whatever. I'm not into that. It was a fantastic course.
I feel the same way when I read the Ehrenreich's piece on the PMC, and I had actually read quite a bit of Barbara Ehrenreich's other stuff first, and kind of like dismissed the PMC piece just yeah, something that I didn't need to take seriously, and then I went back and reread it and realized that it has kind of become a central thing for me to analyze kind of the role of professionals in the 20th century and United States and Europe and the role that they've played.
Yeah, and that sets us up for thinking about this issue of class and composition and how it changes. And for whatever reason, and I want to get into this, we keep going back to Marx. So let's just start there. Why do you, as someone who I don't think runs around saying, I'm a Marxist, why do you take Marx so seriously? Why have you been doing this research into how he conceived of class?
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So I have been wanting to, ever since reading Barbara and John Ehrenreich's essay on the PMC, which I think came out in 78. I didn't read it in 78, but since I did read it, yeah, it's kind of been like the center of anything that I research, which is, not to say that I'm exclusively interested in the PMC, but a lot of what I'm interested in is class. That kind of coincided with me researching Gramsci, which is really the focus of my podcast, The Working Class Intelligentsia. And honestly, part of it is that I liked the name. Dave helped me and pushed me in the direction of that name, which I think he was right to do so. But then part of it, honestly, is that now that I had the name, and it was a term used by Gramsci and definitely an interesting piece of what he was saying. But then I had to figure out what it meant. Yeah. And of course, there's the intuitive definition, but since understanding that Ehrenreich's concept of the PMC, which are essentially, salaried workers who have, probably have some kind of credentials, expertise that is legitimated by their, PMC institutions, wanting to understand, are they members of the working class because they're just, educated workers, or are they a separate class in and of themselves? So I really wanted to understand a class. And to be honest, half of the time I feel like those are really stupid questions and I don't care, like why, why does it matter if the PMC is a class? The professional managerial class is actually a class.
Yeah, what are the stakes of the question in the first place, and why do we why do we care?
Yeah. So, when I approach this as a socialist, my main concern is how do we win, a better society? How do we address climate change? How do we approach politics in a way that really does have people power and work for the people? And when we think about the PMC, especially since I am a member of DSA, and DSA is significantly comprised of people with a middle class background and especially a PMC background, then I want to have a better handle on the relationship of the PMC to the proletariat that Marx is describing. So I think those are the stakes. It's just kind of like if Marx was concerned about a working class party that was necessary in order to mobilize the working class and other classes, I'll add, to overthrow the bourgeois order and, implement a proletarian order. And if, that's a lot of jargon, but the point is that if the working class really is at the center of politics for Marx, and I think he had a lot of insights, I want to at least have a handle on what what we're talking about when we're talking about the PMC and how it relates to the working class as far as political strategy goes, and even just truth, kind of like, I don't know, like, what are we talking about when we make truth claims about the PMC or about any class?
In the chat, Cesar Carissimo asked what was the reading that we referred to by Ehrenreich. And so I went ahead and shared the link to that in the live chat. I also shared the link to the drive full of readings for the course that we taught, which are, I said it, we don't wholesale endorse the readings. Like, they don't all just go together. Some are liberal, some are social democrat, some are conservative, some are socialist. There's a variety of positions there. And then we would have also had some radical French thinkers and some Maoists. And really the goal is to have as many, and neoconservatives as well. The point is to have as many positions on this phenomenon, this formation. People who think it's a class, people who think that it's a caste, people who think that it's a form of neo-feudalism, people who think like, but the point is that there's an elephant in the room. We're trying to figure out what it is. All of these different people might have their own sort of approaches to it. And part of that might be informed by what they bracket out based on their political goals. So I think that, like, one of the interesting things that we could do is, like, from the standpoint of a radical French theorist, like, I don't know, Althusser or Bourdieu, what is this thing we're getting at by calling it the PMC? What does that do for them, considering what their political goals were, as opposed to a Thomas Frank, who's just a liberal, as opposed to James Burnham, a neoconservative. And a big part of the reason why I want to say that, I think it always bears repeating, because in the discourse, when it comes to this term, it's more hotly contested than almost anything else, like in these kinds of spaces. And it's because people want to do working class identity politics and be anti-intellectuals, little populists, or people being that way makes people react the other way and say, oh my God. And so they just want to do this. Well, it's 99% against the 1%. Leave it at that, and we're over here like, no, we need to hone in on this. And so I guess a way of asking that then would be, Elton, how do you think our political goals have shaped how we approach this question, and the ways that we maybe have diverged or disagreed over time, but also where there might be some kind of like agreement?
Let's see. So specifically when we taught the class, I was coming at it from the perspective of, I'm a member of the DSA, and you were critical of socialism, and I think specifically, in irony, identifying as the Pope of the post-left, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So for me, as a member of the DSA and on the National Political Education Committee, like we had the Communist Manifesto as one of the texts in that education curriculum. And I'm trying to think of other ones that would be relevant. there was a number. There was a oh shoot, Meikson's Woods. I'm forgetting her first name. Um, talking about, kind of like class versus identity politics. So that it was from the 80s, so it was in different verbiage, but all of those things to say that, like, with DSA, obviously there's lots of criticism, especially, of the significant impact of PMC politics, but at least with among the National Political Education Committee, there's a real emphasis on class. And in fact, yeah, like I was saying, or Dave was saying, the podcast, we called it class. So for me, talking about the PMC, it's really thinking as people who have a PMC background or got an education and are struggling to pay off our college loans and that kind of stuff. We have to approach politics recognizing that we can't do politics with just PMC that are targeting the PMC as the political subject. And essentially, even from within that, a micro section of the PMC really as the target. So a lot of identity politics, especially what gets called woke, really is focused on the enlightened few within the PMC. And so I think you and I agree that politics needs to essentially, like, be for the masses, I'll say, but the working class, if we want to use that term, the many, I think that where we diverge is, you don't necessarily think that socialism is going to get us where we want to go. And so then the question is kind of like, what can we do as an alternative to socialism? Obviously, you're specifically concerned about winning our time energy as, basically like time energy for everyone. And
Right.
from my perspective, that is just what we call socialism. But
Yeah, I know.
and
It-
I was working on an essay that said just that, but then I had so much trouble with the PMC essay that I was writing for the conference here that yeah, I haven't got to it yet. So one of these days, it's coming soon. Yeah. How'd I
yeah,
do?
that's good. Yeah. Um, what do you think, Nance? Political
I want
goals.
I want to see that essay. PMC is this necessarily socialist project because I
No,
think
time
I
energy.
agree. Oh, that's yeah,
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Time energy is a necessarily uh
Yeah.
socialist project because I think I agree, but I can also kind of like anticipate some problematizations. Um and I like it. I think that's a conversation. It interests me, and I think it would benefit a lot of people. Maybe just to kind of clarify what even do we mean by time energy, and positing this notion that it is this like necessarily common thing. It's between us, right? It's not energy time. We're not just doing top 10 secret tech trips they don't want you to know to make money and lose weight. Like this is not some hyper individuated self-improvement stuff. This really is large scale structural change. And I feel like maybe there are some people who miss out on that. So I think your piece will help kind of clarify that.
And as I am working on, so what I am presenting on is next week is that as I was trying to get my hands on what exactly is class and is the PMC a class and how, should that drive our political strategy? I just kept feeling like I couldn't answer any of those questions. I couldn't make any ground on any of the foundational concepts. And so then basically I'm not able to come up with any strategy from that. So instead, just as like, well, let's just, look at Marx, because he had a lot of confidence in his strategy. It was based in, his personal experience and his historical moment, and just trying to understand, like, when he used the word class, what was he talking about? And then second, what did he have to say about the PMC? Because of course he didn't use the word, but he does make reference to doctors and lawyers and bureaucrats and other PMC types. Um, and then he talks about the middle class more than anything. And specifically the middle class, as I've said for a long time, is not a very Marxist class, because it's just kind of like the everybody in between class.
Yeah.
Which, to be more specific, like, I went into doing this research with the assumption that, Marx's approach to class is to look at ownership or relationship to the means of production. So take any group of people that share a relationship to the means of production, which is to say, share either in that they own the factories, they own the the instruments or the equipment or the land or whatever it is, the intellectual property to that is required for doing production, or they don't own it. Depending on what they own, that determines whether or not they're a class, or kind of like where the boundaries are around class. So with the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie, it's basically saying, like, these group of people own the factories, and these people have to sell their labor power in those factories. And that's, he's specifically talking about, like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of other classes in society, but it's those two that are going to be the big explosion
Right.
when
Class
they come
war.
together. Yeah. Yeah, that's
So,
at
yeah,
the heart of class war. Yeah, exactly.
that it is difficult when doing class, because there's this like ultimate source of income thing, but then like Marx also does allow for like transitional or like stratification,
Yep,
and then the
exactly.
middle class and stuff like that. It's just unclear,
Right.
and it's yeah, it's frustrating to
People who are very confident and that it's not so unclear. I think I guess I could probably just speak for myself, but I might be able to speak for you both as well. It feels like they're gaslighting us. Like, it feels, because it's like,
For
no, I'm
sure.
sorry. We've actually done enough of the readings. You can stop treating us like we're the idiot children who didn't do the readings. We've done enough of the readings to know it's actually not so clear. So to that end, Elton's piece that he's working on for this conference is just going to prove that, basically, like, really, like, set in stone. Actually, yeah, it is this complicated, guys. And so maybe give us a little teaser before we can move into some other stuff here, but just for people who are like wondering about what's going to happen at TUCon, this is something you can all look forward to. It's going to be really killer. But yeah, what do you do in your piece?
Yeah, so like, yeah, starting with that concept of like the middle class, which says nothing about the relationship to the means of production. I wanted to understand, when Marx is using the word class or the concept class, you know, try to understand what he's meaning by that. I didn't expect to find, but what I've concluded, at least at the moment, is that he's really got three solid, distinct definitions of class that he uses at different times throughout his writing. Some of them simultaneously, and he's probably like fully self-aware. And if you were to ask him about it, he'd be like, "Well, yeah, there's a lot of words that we used in two different ways at the same time, and know that we're talking about two distinct concepts, even though you're using the same word." One of those, of course, being relationship to the means of production. Another that sounds really similar but ends up being quite distinct in the consequences is source of income. So like, yeah, where your income comes from can define the class. He has another definition that's talking about and this is really the main one I was meaning, where it's like really a completely different concept. But he'll talk about like the working class basically didn't become a class until it became like politically organized at a national level.
Right.
That's when it became the working class, or a class, as opposed to just like an estate, like, in the French Revolution of 1789, it was the clergy, the aristocracy, the nobles, and the commons. And the working class was just a part of that, but it was, of course, also the bourgeoisie and others, and the peasants and all of that. And then last, Marx does still have like a culture definition of a class, which is what non-Marxists do, is talk about class in some kind of culture, like group that that isn't really tied to anything economic, but is more just shared personalities or something.
The Ehrenreichs, kind of bring that up, and really, for me, that's what really drove it home, was when Barbara and John Ehrenreich were like showing me like, no, Marx said this already, and then it like I was able to kind of put down the barriers or whatever to protect the received scripture that is Marxism. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Quick little interjection here. What you're listening to was recorded months ago at this point and is just now being released because it's something that happened here. We're proud of it, or it's a very important part of the conversation that we will be referring to as time progresses. But I wanted to take a moment to say there's been some updates since then. 2025 is upon us. If you're listening to this from the future and it's no longer 2025, this is still relevant to you. But for those of you listening at the time of release, it's January. 2025 is the year that we weave the bass braid here at Theory Underground. That means my core concepts and fundamental problems at Theory Underground is being woven with Michael Downes's The Fault Line Theory, Introduction to Land and Introduction to Žižek. These are being woven with Nina Power's Philosophy of Nature and Benjamin Studebaker's Political Theory 101, which is really 12 thinkers. Both of those courses, 12 thinkers, all of these happening over the course of 2025 in 12 months. One lecture per month for each course, making it so that you can attend live or you can binge to keep up, and you'll have plenty of time to do the reading. Everybody, I hope that you will enjoy the rest of this. And if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. theoryunderground.com/subscribe. Take care.
So that's the main thing. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, and it's important because most Marxists still use it interchangeably, PMC interchangeably with petty bourgeois. And I kind of am suspecting now at this point that's Lenin's influence, because Lenin was, in a sort of sense, facing this managerial revolution, to speak like Burnham.
Exactly.
So the thing is Lenin said, so we have to be a part of that. We better get a hold of it because it's going to do its thing, and we can help. But the reason this is important, though, is because petty bourgeois becomes a catch-all for any characteristics that the intelligentsia that goes socialist doesn't like. And of course, it's associated with small business owners, but it becomes a catch-all for basically the middle class. And well, that's complicated because, well, what Aaron Wright, what they both do in that first piece is really, they establish, no, this is a change in quantity that leads to a change in quality. We're not talking about doctors and lawyers who made up like maybe 5,000 people in the United States. No, we're talking about that going from 5,000 people to being something like 100,000 people in the span of 3 decades. That's a very rapid development, guys. You can't act like it's not, especially when what it has functionally done is de-skill the workforce to such an extent that there are very few advanced workers, the kinds of people who could run the place without a manager, who could run the place without a boss in case of a strike or in case of whatever. No, those advanced workers being displaced by degree havers, by people who sat at the front of their classes and were so set on getting A's and making their parents proud by going to college. That's very different than a blue-collar advanced worker. To act like that's similar is to, like, you're talking about different species of human beings, literally. The culture of a blue-collar space where it actually takes competence and skill, like a high degree of competence and skill, and I've been there. The culture of that space versus the culture of the space of, you know, the kind of manager or professional who went to college, it's so different. You are talking about a different culture, and that difference in culture without a political formation is the reason why Marx doesn't take the lumpenproletariat seriously in the first place, much less the peasantry. It's the reason. He says, yes, they're a class in culture. Yes, they're a class in being in the same situation. Yes, they're a class apart in terms of their interests. But no, they're not a class because they don't have the possibility of organizing politically because it's just a bag of potatoes. Like, it's just a bunch of like these atomized groupings in a bag. Like, that's how he describes the peasantry in the 18th Brumaire. And so it's like, this is elementary for some people, but no, for me, it's like a big relief to now be able to say that a couple years later after feeling gaslit. Cause I was like, I'd done the initial readings and I had my sensibility, but then when I'd have conversations with people, they'd just be like, oh no, the sociological definition of class is just based on income, but the Marxist one is based on ownership of the means of production. And I'm just like, and then they're like, oh no, that's just a culture thing. That doesn't matter. And I'm like, feel like that. Okay. And here's the thing. We could throw Marx out happily. Okay. We have to have our reasons for killing dad. Sure. But once he's dead and buried, we just have to know that we landed those blows for real and that we actually achieved it. We can't have some dumb version of Marxism and then kill dad because he doesn't agree with us and then run forward with a dumb version of Marxism that doesn't track with our current reality and its situation. Right. Yeah. And so I want to bring it back to the question of the goal. So political goals define the object of analysis or the way that it gets interpreted. So a Maoist versus a French radical versus a liberal versus a social democrat versus a neocon, all of them looking at the PMC. Well, why? How are they all coming to a same conclusion when they all have different political goals? Okay. Well, they might have a different way of interpreting that object, but they see the object nonetheless. And I think a big part of the issue is in most cases, they're arguing against working class identity politics. They're working against workerism. They're working against professional revolutionaries saying, well, I'm a worker too. And they have to argue against it because no matter where you are in the world, thanks to the successes of Marxism, which are also, you know, in a lot of ways its failures, you can't research these things without at least having a couple of them in your life. Okay. But the goal, insofar as we are united, large scale structural change, means that we have to think, well, then, okay, if the goal is that large scale structural change for time, energy, and whatever, well, then who is the subject of that change? Who is the acting subject? Who acts on this historical moment? Which is to say, organizing principle wise, who do we organize with? Or if it's just to be everybody who's interested in some goal, okay, well then is there something we need to be made aware of if we're all belonging to a class that doesn't want to realize itself as a class? Maybe that's something we should be aware of, especially if its original intentionality was to undermine working class organizing and independence, which it was. That's the other part of all of this, is that it wasn't accidental. It's an actual response, not just to the material situation in terms of the mode of production, but as a way of maintaining the relations of production, which was racialized. And so, yeah, the goal matters in that sense. And so, and then I guess where we've disagreed, I've said, no, it's not socialism in terms of like the goal, or as the means to getting there. And you've said, but it is, because Timenergy is inherently socialistic. and then you said, the PMC is real, but it's not a class. And then you, 6 months to a year and a half later, having dinner with me or lunch, you're like, I think it might be a class. And I was just like, okay, so we've changed over time. Now for me, socialism is still just like a problem. And it's more of a problem and a question than something that I could just subscribe to. But it's not off the table. I all the problems that I raised in conversations earlier on today's stream are still there. But this is where we're at. This is kind of this is what we're working through. And I feel like this conversation is one of those most important ones that we keep coming back to. And so, yeah, I'm really, really stoked about your piece, because you gave me a rough draft of it and it's almost all just quotes. It's like,
yeah.
So like on that note of like, well, why do we care what Marx said about it? Well, because people, they always refer to him until he stops backing them up. And then they want to throw him out. And it's like, okay, but we have to first square what he thought and whether his diagnosis of the situation was true or not. And then how has the situation changed and what is to be done now? Like we have to track that out for ourselves. We can't just follow anybody's authority on the issue. Or if you want to, you can follow our authority. We'll tell you, but you'll have to give us some time. You'll have to be patient.
Yeah. I think that's it too. So it's both. Yeah. Who's the subject, the political subject, and then for me, kind of like when we talk about socialism, and I think this is a lot of like what Žižek's project is about too, but it just is like, what can we retain from Marx, or how can we reimagine what the socialist project looks like? And for me, so much of that is understanding what Marx meant when he said the things that he did. And then I think some of it is like kind of in identifying like, well, what did he get wrong? But even if he got everything right, you still have the fact that he didn't anticipate the explosion of the middle class in the way that you were just talking about, with like Ehrenreich's in particular talking about the PMC exploding in the late 1800s, the population of the PMC exploding. And then also Marx was talking about proletarianization. So essentially he anticipated that the petty bourgeoisie would no longer, wouldn't be around much longer. That essentially you would just have proletarians and big bourgeoisie. There's that. And then there's, about a, million other things that have changed since his lifetime. And so even if he was right in his moment about the dictatorship of the proletariat, for example, this idea that the 1848 revolution and the Paris Commune of 1871, Paris Commune specifically being the like tangible example of what the dictatorship of the proletariat would have looked like. Even if he was right about that being the necessary path to socialism at that time. It just is not like, it just seems completely implausible in today's conditions that that Marx's analysis would still fit to today. And when I say that, I think things like Das Kapital, capital, like his analysis of capitalism is almost, 100% still applicable. Like almost none of it can I, question, at least from my naive understanding of it. But it seems like that there's some other stuff, especially anything where Marx was anticipating what the future would look like, that yeah, that he would take a much different approach to it today, that he would want to reanalyze the stuff that he was talking about in today's context. So
Right. And
I think that's where you and I agree, is just kind of like that, we need to understand Marx so that we can kind of reassess it and see what it would look like today.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess I think I can say that, big assumption here at Theory Underground, is that, so things have changed. What all has changed? We try to focus on a lot of the what has changed part of things. And the media, specifically mediums, using Marshall McLuhan and Baudrillard, we're not talking about the news media. So the mediums and how they, our central nervous system has literally been rewired. It includes satellites and cables under the ocean. We have different organs in our bodies than we used to. And some of those organs are in part outside of our bodies. And we're all connected in ways that we kind of don't understand and we're still coming to terms with. And that's the whole point of critical media theory at Theory Underground. And part of that gets us to the thesis of the post-class fractured mass. I don't know if you actually got a chance to see that lecture, but the thing that I was going to...
I did, yeah.
Oh, dope. Yeah,
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, a big part of it that I didn't emphasize enough, I don't think, is that the PCFM, post-class fractured mass, it's not post-class. Like when you first heard the term, you're like, well, I like this, but I'm not post-class. But it's like, well, what we're getting at is this post-two theory. If you've emphasized a two-class theory, you're either doing that because of Bernie Sanders, Occupy Wall Street, or a dumb version of Marxism, probably colored by someone who was just like, well, there's the bourgeoisie and there's the proletarian. That's the only two classes that have ever existed in capitalism. And maybe we could talk about the middle class, but of course is, not capable of sitting with, peasants are a class, rentiers, that's a class, not capable of getting into that kind of thing. And so what we're talking about is post two class theory. It's not a post caring about class theory, right? In fact, we care about this theory or the approach to thinking about things through class more than anything, but not for the sake of identity politics. Working class identity politics is lame. Yeah, we can sit here all day and talk about our different workplaces and experiences and standpoint epistemology. It's not the goal. And no one's going to try to do oppression Olympics on the basis of the jobs they worked. That's silly. The point here is, okay, whatever you try to actually organize, and I think people who miss the point, they just haven't actually spent enough time trying to organize. You do find yourself around people who want to write other people off on the basis of their supposed class standing, or think that they should be able to talk, or that their position is an authentic working class position, and this other person's position is not an authentic working. It's silly. It gets really silly. And then of course you pull back the mask and you find out that person is actually, they're either a part of or trying to go into the PMC, and they're trying to act like, no, they speak from the standpoint of the authentic worker position. And it's like, well, maybe there's not an authentic worker position. And maybe if there was, it would be stupid. Or maybe there's a lot of different authentic worker positions, and we can't just take that as the last word on the matter. In fact, maybe there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, and that at the end of the day, we just have to go with what works for getting us large-scale structural change. And some of what works for getting us that isn't even going to come from workers knowing what's in their best interests or having some kind of class consciousness in the first place. Maybe that's not even a part of that puzzle. So I just kind of want to say all of that and let you guys do whatever you want with it. But I just kind of want to, I think this all bears repeating at least every 6 months at Theory Underground, because we're so misrecognized on this position. And some of the some people's responses to the post-class fractured mass thesis gave, it indicated that they thought we just don't care about class anymore. We're so over that. That's not what we're getting at.
I know.
Yeah, it's like we've.
Yeah, please go ahead, Dan.
I just like it. We've become different types of political subjects, like the conditions of possibility when it comes to organizing and when it comes to actualizing goals, when it comes to accessing and executing power. Like all these things have completely changed. So like people act like the worker is still the revolutionary subject, but like we're a different type of subject entirely. So of course we're concerned about class, but it does get old having people say silly things. Because I think we probably spent more time thinking and conversing about this issue than they have. But then that gets into like petty internet shit. Yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off, Elton.
Oh, you're fine. No, I am still working on, just kind of like what is obviously I ask these kinds of questions, like what is the post-class fractured math? And I'm kind of slow to arriving at an understanding of stuff. And then I feel like, once I've got it, then I don't let go. But, like as far as class goes, I think that it still matters. For example, like I still think that, maybe I'd even say like the most important thing is the workplace and class identity as a worker, and the self-consciousness and the political structure, the political infrastructure that gets created through the labor movement. And I still think that has the potential to bring people together. But in that, I also think that the tenant organizing is really exciting. So it's economic, but it's not workplace centric. So tenant organizing is like, a bunch of renters who have all one landowner in common can essentially go on a rent strike. So essentially there's legal instruments in place where they still pay their rent, but it doesn't go to the landowner, for example, to the landlord. And that gives them some legal power. And that happening, and in fact, Boise DSA right now is focusing on this. But that happening at a national level, for example, creates the potential for, I don't know if you want to call it, class unity, but I think it essentially becomes class unity. And then third, I'll mention, I mentioned like college debt, which is something that has been significant for me. I know with, oh shoot, I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who did the Žižek exclamation mark movie. Also after Occupy Wall Street started, I should remember the name of this, debt strike or something like that. So it's essentially a debtors union. It's like the first debtors union. And what that's saying is that like if all of these debtors come together and refuse to pay their debts, then, with enough people coming together, they actually have some political power, and it becomes unenforceable for them to pay those debts, and they potentially have some similar kind of leverage that unions going on strike have. Now, this is in its like very primitive form, but Astrid Taylor, that's her name. But Astrid Taylor is arguing that, we might be having a much different conversation in 100 or 200 years when this kind of political strategy is, and self-consciousness is brought to, a different level. So I think those are the kinds of things that I still retain from class consciousness, recognizing all of the things. I mean, I still am very interested in all of the things that we're talking about with the post-class fractured mass, with Bourdieu talking about, culture and yeah, just the sense of identity or the camaraderie that culture does create. Like there's a bunch of different things that I recognize kind of undermine the traditional Marxist understanding of class that does need to be accounted for, and recognizing even just that we live in such a fragmented society where it's really hard to imagine creating some kind of political unity, especially outside of your narrow, PMC elite or whatever. But I at least find some hope that there is still some movement in the labor movement these days, and that we're seeing like new forms of unity. I don't know how to say that. It was like,
Yeah.
class consciousness in a way.
When I feel like I think I probably have to send an email to Walter Ben Michaels from earlier today. I feel like I definitely made it sound like I'm anti-union, and I'm not. I'm not at all. Like Sohrab Ahmari in Compact, super pro-union, but also like has like this huge thesis on like the fall of the union movements in the U.S. and like why they fell. And I find it like all, very compelling. It's important, right? It's important for those industries that will probably always have unions or need to have unions for as long as they exist, and probably have for as long as they have existed, basically. That seems very important, and also kind of like none of my business, because I've never worked in one of those places. I've literally never worked in one of those places. Like I've never worked a place that had a union. I've worked over 30 jobs. I've never been in a union. I've never been adjacent to a union. When I was at Amazon the first time, they were starting the one in New York or Newark or wherever. And, Stephen Smalls and all that. And I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome. And so of course I was having conversations with some of my coworkers, and we were like, maybe a union. And this was like me at my most black pilled. But the reason I liked those conversations with those guys, who, by the way, we're all guys, was because they weren't like DSA college kids. They were just people who were like, kind of like, yeah, you know what? That's cool. And I am aware that it was mostly, post-grad DSA members who made it happen in Newark. But in the meantime, we're here now, which is very far away from there, and we haven't seen it happen anywhere else. And part of the reason it wasn't going to happen where I was, outside of like the laws and complications with trying to organize in Idaho, which is it's not easy. You're definitely swimming upstream. Is the super high turnover rate at Amazon warehouses? Like it's so high that I'm not sure that I ever. Okay, this is I'm gonna be very like exaggerating here, like, but there was never a time when I looked up and there weren't people training. Like there's always a crew of people coming through training. Every time you go by a certain part of the area, you see, oh, look, more people training. They're constantly replacing people who just left. And in fact, I would strike up the conversation about this with someone. We start having a good conversation. Maybe we talk 2 or 3 times and then they're gone. And it's like that turnover rate is why I don't think it'll ever be realistic at Amazon warehouses. There was a hot second where it was more realistic because there was like a social media app. They made this stupid mistake of allowing people to just kind of communicate through social media means within the organization. Floor. Yeah. And as a result, you did get a union out of it. But people can't just go get on the Facebook group for that Amazon warehouse and it be enough of the people that you can actually do something with it. I could see some means for doing something about it. But even then, we're in this problem of we need to phase out workers at Amazon being full-time, and it needs to become part-time work, socially necessary labor that is not a person's identity in the first place, except for the weird person who wants to be the exception to that.
Yeah.
That's this much bigger issue, I feel like. And that's one of those things that worker-place democracy, unions, co-ops, none of that stuff really gets to it. And that's why it's like, well, for large-scale structural change, that's actually probably going to require technocrats, a charismatic leader, some kind of democratic pretense, and big changes that will make a lot of unions unhappy, right? So...
I think we disagree on those last 3 points, but
okay.
But we can yeah. I mean, for me, the contradiction that has to be wrestled with is bringing about a world with less work through labor. I don't, and I admit that I don't have that one solved. So
right. Wait, what were we have to close out now to bring on Rachel, but before we do.
Well, you were talking about like technocracy and some
charismatic leader.
Technocrats, charisma leader.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm more sold on it being that than unions, even though I'm not sold on it being that. So I just okay. I'm not sold on that either. So thank you for pushing back on it. I'm exaggerating, but I think that's the job. We need to just exaggerate. Trump has taught us one thing, exaggeration goes a long ways. Hyperstition, baby.
Absolutely.
Many people are saying.
I know.
Okay. But anyway, Elton, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Elton.
Yes, indeed.
And folks,
can't wait to see you, man.
Hell yeah. All right. And now we'll be right back after this. TUCon 2024 happening October 24th through 27th. It's 4 days of brain overstimulation. That's right. We're going to be talking about sci-fi philosophy, human futures, critical media theory, the question of post-politics, like all of it, psychoanalysis, phenomenology, structuralism, all of these various approaches. We're going to be getting into it. We're going to get in the deep end. If you're curious, if you want to attend, if you live in Boise, that's good for you. If you want to travel here, well, you can come. But if you would like to just join virtually, you will be able to attend it via Zoom. That's right. Register today. Thank you, and hope to see you there at TUCon.
Tight, yeah! It's correct title.
M-Stews. The epic marathon streams at Theory Underground. M-Stews.
They bring joy to audiences.
Bring together a wide variety of people who are critical of power, of the state, of capital, but they're not just standard left. This is a place for people who are second-guessing, working through things, questioning, and even if they're not, then they're willing to talk to people who are, because ultimately Theory Underground is for workers with earbuds getting into theory. The people who are turning to theory because they're saying, well, none of this really makes sense, or it's not really working, so there's got to be something more. That's what this is all about. We love to do these, and we go hard. The longest M-Stew we've done consecutively was 17 hours. Now we're doing another one. Say hello in the chat and keep it playing in the background throughout the day to boost the stream. Don't bother liking or commenting or subscribing, though, because that doesn't actually help us, not one bit. It doesn't help us at all. It's not helpful, not one bit. Do not click the like button. Do not subscribe. If you like this kind of content, it's best to just turn it off and never look at it again. Definitely don't teach the algorithm that you like it. Definitely don't share it with your friends. And of course, just turn it off as soon as possible. That's the biggest help. Thank you.
Sorry, I spoke too much, please.
You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon.
But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback, and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory. You know, the CCRU versus Ljubljana School, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and look, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on, an interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah, so the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university, they criticize the left, they don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube, and they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. You have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism. Actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.